with John Randine and Robin Black to chat about all the news going down today. We've got a rematch that's going to be happening at UFC 197 involving Tony Ferguson and Michael Johnson. Significant because this was a fight that took place in May of 2012, which is the one blemish you can look over Tony Ferguson's record over the last number of years. Is this a step forward for Tony Ferguson, or is this a step back? We do have Michael Johnson that he's coming off a big loss to Nate Diaz at this point, and Tony Ferguson, he's right there knocking at the door at the top of the 155-pound weight class. Does this move him forward?
I think it does, in the sense that Michael Johnson's a name. He gets to avenge a loss. But Tony Ferguson, when we were down in Vegas talking to this guy, he is just in a different mental place. He believes he should be fighting for the title. He's confident that he has the skills that can match up with anybody, including RDA. But he's not getting that shot right now. You want to stay active. You want to stay active against top-tier guys. Michael Johnson is a top-tier guy. And then based on their performances, Tony Ferguson's against Edson Barbosa, where Barbosa was taking it to him. Tony showed his resolve and got the victory, where Michael Johnson, on the other hand, everybody expected him to beat Nathan Diaz based on everything we've seen with his performances, and to have that kind of flat performance, and then Nathan Diaz had a spectacular performance. I think Tony Ferguson would be very confident going into that fight.
Tony Ferguson's a gangster.
Yeah.
Like, he is legitimately a gangster. I don't mean he has a gang and sells drugs and stuff. He's just a gangster with sunglasses on, too, as he strutted through the arena that day, the day after that awesome fight. 2 black eyes, still got his sunglasses on, $100,000 in his pocket. That was a very happy man, very proud man, like he should have been from that unbelievable performance. Avenging a loss, man. I know he's got 2 on his record earlier in his life. He may never get a chance to avenge those because he's surpassed those guys so far. But the one lone one on there, he'll be proud of that. George St. Pierre lost to Matt Serra, beat him up. Lost to Matt Hughes, beat him up. That's what these elite of the elite want to do, and that's why this one makes sense for him. And man, even a couple of years ago, thinking about fighting and competing in fighting was, we're boxing now. Oh, we're against the cage. Okay, now we're wrestling. When you even analyzed it by area. That ain't the case anymore. Fighting happens in the areas in between those zones, and that's where Tony Ferguson is on top of the game.
This, to me, is a big problem when it comes to the matchmaking involving the lightweight title at this point. You don't know how available the champion is going to be after March the 5th when Dos Anjos and Conor McGregor fight. You don't know if Dos Anjos wins and he'll be ready to come back in July and defend that title. You don't know if Conor McGregor wins this title and that belt is on ice until December. So it creates a big problem with your contenders, your Eddie Alvarez's, your Khabib Nurmagomedovs, and Tony Ferguson I put into that. And all of these contenders, I don't think you necessarily want to be pairing them off together and you're eliminating contenders because you might need one coming out of the Dos Anjos fight if he wins that title. It's somewhat unprecedented where they might have to deal with a dual champion in Conor McGregor, and where that puts the contenders on the sidelines.
And that's why you got to take fights. I mean, I'm sure Eddie Alvarez, after getting this fight under his belt with Anthony Pettis, he's in line for a shot at 155 pounds. If people can sell, if the UFC can sell Carlos Condit taking on Robbie Lawler, despite the fact people were saying, oh, he doesn't deserve it, he lost to blah, blah, blah. And in this situation, it's the same thing. Okay, Eddie Alvarez looks like he is the guy most likely to get a shot. Of course, then you throw in the Eagle. What happens if Conor becomes the champion? Is there going to be a rematch with RDA? We have to wait to see the outcome of the fight before we start figuring out who's next in line for the title. And then on top of that, you have so many big names ahead of you. So that's why I think Tony Ferguson thinks this is the best thing for him, because my next fight is not going to be
that to me is where everything has moved, where I think a lot of fighters are still in the old mindset of what you had to do to achieve a title fight. I think it goes weight by weight.
Yeah.
It's a different criteria at heavyweight than it is at lightweight, where 2 wins at heavyweight might garner you that title fight. You might need 5 at 155 pounds. It's just the bar is being raised that much more.
And conversely, at 125 pounds, you could see in the next year or so that DJ clears out the division and the UFC brings in somebody, an undefeated Russian, for example, to fight for the UFC title. So that the landscape, as you mentioned, changes from weight class to weight class. They just have to tell the right story and give the most deserving fighters their crack at gold.
And, you know, Conor McGregor versus RDA, if McGregor is at his best if he is performing and able to be in the state that he needs to be in to win, the state he was in against Jose Aldo, he will win the lightweight title. It's going to be between now and then that will tell the story. The other day, he seemed slightly distracted by business and all these kinds of things, still sort of enjoying himself, but he was often in a state of playfulness and joy leading up to a fight, and that's when he's dangerous. When he is just enjoying, surveying the landscape and running everything and having a good time. That's what will tell the tale as we get closer. If he's in that mental state, he's winning that lightweight title. And then, there are some exciting guys in there. But for me, man, Ferguson is the next guy who is operating outside of the structures of what 2014 fighting was, 2015 fighting was, that sort of improvisational between the zone stuff. That last fight of his, he was creative in odd positions. Those are the guys to watch now.
Keeping it with the lightweight division, we've spoken so much about UFC fighters whose contracts have come due, who Bellator is going to go after. On the other side of things, Michael Chandler was on MMA Junkie Radio this week saying that he only has a certain amount of fights left on his contract. And that presents an interesting scenario. If he is going to stay with Bellator, if you're UFC, do you get very aggressive and you try and go after some of Bellator's fighters when you've seen your own fighters looking outside? I think Michael Chandler, the idea that he could enter the UFC's lightweight division, that creates a lot of exciting fights. And there's a lot up in the air with someone like a Michael Chandler.
Yeah, very interesting, because we were having this debate or conversation before we were on air about, where the rankings of 155-pound fighters, because most of the time when we show rankings, we're looking at UFC fighters. So, because I think if you're objective about things, you have to consider Michael Chandler and Will Brooks, the Bellator champion, in that top of the heap. I mean, you just have to look back at their fights with Eddie Alvarez. Many people believe Eddie Alvarez is the number 3 or 4 guy in the world. So that means Will Brooks should be there. That means Michael Chandler should be there. And I think you just have to look the reverse of what's happening with Benson Henderson. Why isn't Ben Henderson signed right now? How come they haven't announced that? Because obviously there's negotiating going back and forth between Bellator and the UFC and Ben Henderson. But just like for Michael Chandler, does he want to be the big fish in a small pond, or does he really want to challenge himself and go to the big show? I mean, Bellator is gaining momentum, but everybody recognizes the UFC is the top promotion on the planet. If you want to make the most money you can possibly make in mixed martial arts, you go to the UFC. So it depends on Michael Chandler's motives.
Yeah, UFC, you got to bring us Mike Chandler, man. You got to bring Mike Chandler over. He's built the whole game around his super elite attributes. He performs really well, and although he's built a boxing, wrestling-centric game, he's got a real smoothness to him that most of them don't. That's the difference when you see him and Alvarez. He's the smoother of the two. He's the more elegant, violent fighter. And hey, man, you don't think you can promote Michael Chandler?
Oh, yeah.
Dude goes to church as a handsome guy. If your daughter brings Michael Chandler home, you'll be like, hey, this good, responsible, young, athletic man. UFC, you got to bring us Michael Chandler.
His teammate's going to be in action next weekend. We'll be discussing that a lot more. Ryan Bader, who will be taking on Anthony Johnson. That card also features Ben Rothwell taking on Josh Barnett. And as we speak about the heavyweight division, it's another really interesting one because you're starting to see a lot of players emerging in the heavyweight ranks, which it's kind of a feast or famine style of division in the UFC in their history, where they seem to have a lot of viable contenders after we get through the rematch with Fabricio Verdum and Cain Velasquez. But Josh Barnett, this is a very quick turnaround for him. He only fought this past September against Roy Nelson, looked very good in that fight in Japan. And he's drawing Ben Rothwell, who is on, to me, the best run he's had of his entire career.
Yeah, right now, heavyweights, arguably the best time, because we don't see Fedor in the UFC. We don't see a Prime Minotauro, who's my guy, but just outstanding. You look at the King of the Mountain, Fabricio Verdum, one of the best, if not the best heavyweight in jiu-jitsu. We've seen his evolution, doing what he did against Mark Hunt and against Cain Velasquez, just looking sensational. And of course, Cain Velasquez, I think in most people's mind, one of the best, if not the best heavyweight of at least the last 5 years. Junior Dos Santos, we thought he was the guy. Stipe Miocic, now Alistair Overeem back in the mix. And then Ben Rothwell, Travis Brown getting that victory. Just a really, really good time. And now Ben Rothwell and Josh Barnett. I would not be surprised to see Ben Rothwell get the victory over Josh Barnett. But Barnett is just one of these his fight IQ is through the roof, so it's very difficult to try to anticipate what
Barnett's going to win that fight.
I think so.
I have a feeling. I mean, these things, especially with heavyweights, man, all it takes is one on the chin. But I'm excited about that one. But I'm working on a breakdown right now for the UFC. We're going to shoot it next week. My guy Jeff Chan and James Garcia and I are working on it. And so part of the process of building one of these is you go back and you watch it all. And man, are these guys good. Cain Velasquez, when he is coming forward and when he has his game together and when he is starting to wear you down, there's nobody more devastating. There's nothing scarier in the world than Cain Velasquez, who's feeling his confidence come up and feeling your energy go down slightly. There's some serious violence going on right there. But Verdum's game is built and has been built to kind of exploit a lot of the aspects of Cain. Right now, as we're in the middle stages of building this breakdown, I'm still leaning towards Cain having an uphill battle, C-level Cain included, having an uphill battle to beat Verdum.
That fight, it's very interesting to see what kind of Cain Velasquez we see in this rematch. And the wild card in the heavyweight division, in my estimation, is still Alistair Overeem. And what's going to be his next move? Is it going to be in the UFC? You have Stipe Miocic, who looked fantastic back on January the 2nd in his fight, and where he lands in all of this. It's an interesting time where you can go many different directions after that heavyweight fight in February.
Yeah, what's good about it is that just all of the different intriguing, fresh matchups. I mean, let's just say that Ben Rothwell gets past Josh Barnett, or even whatever. It doesn't matter who wins that fight. The next fight for Josh Barnett, for example, could be a fight with Andrei Arlovski. And you think about two former UFC heavyweight champions. I think a lot of people want to see a fight like that. So yes, there are title implications, but there's so many cool matchups right now in the heavyweight division.
All right. Lots of news to talk about next week as we go into the card in Newark, New Jersey. We'll have a preview show for you Thursday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be discussing the light heavyweight main event involving Anthony Johnson and Ryan Bader, and as we mentioned, Josh Barnett taking on Brendan Rothwell in heavyweight action.